In September 2017, millions of people updated their iPhones to iOS 11, expecting new features and a fresh design, but they discovered something terrible. Apple had just permanently erased over 200,000 apps from existence, and there was no way to get them back. To understand why this was so meaningful, we need to understand the significance of the App Store. The App Store launched with around 500 apps available to download, on a platform that would eventually host over 2 million. It was, in the most literal sense, a gold rush. The first wave of developers treated the App Store the way musicians treat a new instrument. They experimented. They built things that felt impossible on a phone only a year earlier. A single developer named Steve Demeter built a tilt-based puzzle game called Trism, priced it at $5, and within 2 months had made $250,000 in profit. He was working alone, with just an idea, an iPhone, and a global storefront that Apple had handed to anyone willing to build for it. Tap Tap Revenge arrived at launch and became the most downloaded free game in 2008, pulling in over 1 million users in its first 20 days. If you had an iPhone in 2008, you almost certainly had it installed. It was the iPhone's version of Guitar Hero, tapping colored dots to the beat of songs on a tiny screen, and it was addictive enough that nearly 1 in 5 iPhone owners had it on their device at some point. And in 2013, Flappy Bird arrived. A single Vietnamese developer named Dong Nguyen built it alone. The gameplay took about 3 seconds to understand and years to master, and at its peak, it was generating around $50,000 a day in advertising revenue. The game became genuinely global. Strangers on trains compared their high scores, and when Nguyen pulled it from the App Store himself, exhausted by the attention it had brought him, people posted pictures of second-hand iPhones with it still installed, sold at significant premiums. The crucial thing about all of these games, the thing that made this era feel distinct from what came after, was the pricing model. Most of these games were premium products. You paid once, usually somewhere between 99 pence and $5 or $6, and you owned the game. There were no season passes. You bought it the same way you'd buy a book. You owned it the same way. In-app purchases arrived in October 2009, and by 2011 and 2012, they'd begun to shift the App Store toward the free-to-play model that dominates today. But for those first few years, between 2008 and around 2013, the App Store was a place where independent developers could make a living selling good games at honest prices, where a solo developer in a bedroom could compete with a major studio. And every single one of those apps was built on 32-bit architecture, because in 2008, 2009, and 2010, that was simply what iPhones ran on. Nobody thought to worry about it because nobody had reason to. But then, Apple changed that. In September 2013, Apple introduced the iPhone 5S. On stage, Phil Schiller called the new A7 chip desktop-class architecture, the first 64-bit chip ever shipped in a smartphone. And that chip was the beginning of a timer counting down on every single app that the golden age had produced. To understand why, it helps to think about what 32-bit and 64-bit actually mean in practical terms. Think of a chip's ability to process data like lanes on a motorway. A 32-bit chip is a 2-lane road. It can move a certain amount of traffic at once, handle a certain amount of memory, process a certain amount of data in each cycle. A 64-bit chip doubles those lanes. More traffic, more memory, more data, processed simultaneously. And for everyday tasks, the difference in 2013 wasn't always obvious to a casual user. But performance-wise, for where Apple wanted to take the iPhone in the years ahead, 32-bit was a ceiling they were already approaching. A unified 64-bit operating system is faster and allows apps to access significantly more memory than the 4 gigabytes that 32-bit architecture could ever address. But maintaining compatibility between the two simultaneously required Apple to essentially run 2 versions of core system processes in parallel, which added complexity and added size to every iOS release. And at some point, the old architecture had to go. The question was always when and how much warning Apple would give. In February 2015, Apple sent a notification to developers, and from that point forward, any new app submitted to the App Store had to support 64-bit. And then, in June 2015, that requirement extended to updates of existing apps as well. Any developer who wanted to update their app, to fix a bug, to add a feature, to change anything at all, had to rebuild their entire code base to meet the 64-bit standard. The golden age of the App Store produced small developers as well as successful studios. For games with one- or two-person operations, the games still sat on the App Store, still available to download, generating occasional purchases, but the developers who built them had long since stopped actively maintaining them. And in January 2017, Apple released the first beta of iOS 10.3, and inside it was a new warning for any 32-bit app. This app will not work with future versions of iOS. The countdown had a number on it now. People who played 32-bit games started to understand that the time they had left with them was finite, and nobody knew exactly when it would run out. But it ran out in September 2017. When iOS 11 launched on September 19, 2017, every 32-bit app on every updated iPhone stopped working at the same moment. When users tapped a 32-bit app, they got the same message every single time. The developer of this app needs to update it to improve its compatibility. There was no way to fall back. Analytics firm Sensor Tower had estimated before launch that around 187,000 apps would be affected, which represented roughly 8% of everything on the App Store at the time. The real number may have been higher, because Sensor Tower's figures were based on apps that had appeared in the charts at some point and hadn't been updated since before the iPhone 5S. Apps that had never ranked highly, niche tools, and forgotten games just sitting in the catalog may not have been captured in that count at all. Out of those 187,000 affected apps, games made up the largest single category, which was around 38,600 games, which was roughly 1 in 5 of everything the App Store had ever killed that day. And they were games that worked perfectly well on iOS 10, that ran without issue on the hardware people already owned, that people had paid real money for years earlier and expected to be able to play indefinitely. Because on a PC, if you want to play a game from 1995, you have options. DOSBox is a free, widely available emulator that runs DOS software on modern hardware. Steam maintains libraries of games that are decades old and ensures they remain playable. The Internet Archive hosts playable versions of ancient software in a browser. On iOS, none of those escape routes exist. Apple's closed ecosystem means there are no third-party emulators, no compatibility layers, or archive equivalent for App Store software. When Apple says a 32-bit app no longer runs, that app no longer runs anywhere on any device that Apple controls. The only people who can still play those games are the ones who kept an old iPhone or iPad on iOS 10 or earlier. The digital preservation community recognized the scale of what iOS 11 had done and referred to it as an app apocalypse because of the quantity of history that evaporated in a single software update. A game that survived the iOS 11 cutoff, Infinity Blade, because Epic had the resources to update it to 64-bit and did so. But the broader burden that Apple placed on developers caught up with it anyway. Because in December 2018, just over a year after iOS 11, Epic pulled all 3 Infinity Blade games from the App Store. And the reason they gave was that it had become increasingly difficult to support the series at a level that meets our standards. For a company that was simultaneously making hundreds of millions of dollars a month from Fortnite, the burden of maintaining 3 beloved mobile games had still become more than they were willing to carry. iOS 11 brought a new control center, but it also burned a library of mobile gaming. There's no official archive or legal way to play them. But what was your favorite classic iPhone game that you can't play anymore? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to learn more about older apps, you can check out the 6 apps that failed completely.